This video is sponsored by Nebula. This is the European Union today, 27 member states across the European continent, joined together in a political and economic union. But there are 10 more countries waiting to join, possibly expanding the union to 37 members in the future. There are also countries like Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein, the UK, and even Canada that aren't members, but still want closer ties with the EU. The thing is, not all of these countries want the same kind of relationship, and some of the countries already inside of the Union no longer seem to fully share its values. But the European Union, as it stands, is largely a one-size-fits-all model. You're either in or you're out. It's inflexible, and for aspiring members, the waiting process can stretch on for years, sometimes decades, with no clear outcome in sight. So is there a better way? We think there might be. A multi-tiered EU, different levels of membership, kind of like different Netflix plans, and countries get to choose what fits them best. In this video, we'll take a quick look at how the EU is structured today and how it could evolve into something more adaptable in the future. So, the European Union today, a political and economic union with shared regulation and governance. It's built around 7 core institutions, though the most well-known are the European Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission. Through these institutions, each of the 27 member countries is represented and gets to vote in the decision-making process. The EU has many areas of responsibility, but some of the most important and well-known are the single market, which guarantees the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people, the Schengen area, which allows people to travel across borders between member states without needing a passport, and the Eurozone, where the EU manages the euro as a shared currency across member states. Now this is where things start to get a bit messy. While all EU countries are part of the single market, not every EU country is part of the Schengen area or the Eurozone. Let's start with the Schengen area. Most countries participate, except for Cyprus and Ireland. As for the Eurozone, there are 7 EU countries that still use their own national currency. 6 of them are expected to adopt the euro, eventually. But Denmark has an official opt-out, so it can stick with its currency permanently. Now, to make things even more confusing, there are also non-EU countries that are still closely tied to the EU. Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein are part of the single market through the European Economic Area, or EEA. That agreement gives them access to most of the same economic freedoms as EU member states. Switzerland isn't in the EEA, but it can still participate in the single market thanks to a patchwork of bilateral deals, with a few exceptions here and there. And when it comes to Schengen, all 4 are fully in. But the euro is a bit different. That's something reserved for EU countries only. And then, because there clearly aren't enough unions already, there's the EU's customs union, which handles trade rules, tariffs, and collective trade agreements. All EU member countries are part of it. They have to be. But countries like Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, they're not. They've chosen to stay out so they can make their own trade deals. That's actually one of the big reasons they haven't integrated further into the EU system. Countries like Turkey, Andorra, San Marino, and Monaco also have special custom arrangements with the EU. Turkey is in a partial customs union covering industrial goods. Andorra, San Marino, and Monaco have custom arrangements too, though each with their own specific terms and limitations. And lastly, there's the European Political Community, a kind of discussion forum that brings together 47 countries, both EU and non-EU, to talk about big cross-border challenges like security, energy, migration, and infrastructure. It allows countries to cooperate without committing to EU membership. But it's really important to note, nothing in this group is legally binding. So, that is the situation today. And yes, it already looks like there are unofficial levels of membership forming around the EU and even within it. But don't be fooled by this picture. In reality, there's still only one true type of membership: full EU membership. Things like the single market, Schengen, the Eurozone, and the customs union, these aren't separate clubs. They're core parts of the EU framework, and with a few exceptions, every EU country is expected to eventually join all of them. As for Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland, Yes, they really seem to have a selective membership, but they still follow many of the same rules as EU members. Plus, they've had to negotiate complex bilateral agreements to get there. And for any new country to get that kind of special status, it's often just as complicated, if not more so, than joining the EU itself. Let's put it this way. The 10 current candidate countries have collectively been waiting for over 125 years, and still not a single one of them is part of the single market, Schengen area, or the Eurozone. So right now, we really only have two disconnected levels, the European Union and the European political community. And let's not kid ourselves. For now, the political community is mostly just a talk club, with no real structure or binding commitments. Okay, we're finally getting to the juicy part of the video. How should we restructure the European community so that more members can join more quickly? This section of the video is partly based on the Franco-German EU institutional reform document, and partly on my own opinion. So feel free to jump into the comments and share your thoughts also. I see 3, maybe even 4, different tiers of membership. And let's start right at the center, the core, the European Union as we know it today. This tier includes all the main features we already discussed. The Eurozone, single market, Schengen area, and the customs union. Full EU members pay into the EU budget. They're represented in the EU institutions, and most importantly, they have voting rights. They help shape the rules we all follow in the EU. Then comes the first outer ring, countries that aren't full members, but still participate in major parts of the EU system. Let's call this tier associate membership. The core of this level would be access to the single market, the Schengen area, and/or the customs union, but not the Eurozone. I could even imagine a modular model, where countries in this tier can pick and choose from a set of EU features, based on their interests, capabilities, and readiness to align with EU standards. It's a more flexible approach, one that recognizes that not every country wants or is ready for the full EU package. Associate members would not be committed to an ever closer union or deeper political integration, and they wouldn't take part in certain areas, like foreign policy or fisheries. They also would not be represented in the European Parliament or Commission, and they'd have no voting rights. So when it comes to the single market, for example, they'd be rule takers, not rule makers. Associate members would also contribute financially to the European Union, but at a much lower level than full EU membership. Then comes the second outer ring. Let's call it the European Community. This tier would be different from the others. No Eurozone, single market, or Schengen area. No legal integration with the EU, no binding EU laws, and no strict rule of law requirements. Instead, it would focus on geopolitical alignment and political cooperation, especially in areas like trade, security, energy, climate policy, and crisis response. The idea is to create a space where countries discuss key issues, form coalitions of the willing, and take action together, even if they're not in the EU. And we're already seeing early signs of this model. Take the Franco-British-led initiative for the so-called reassurance troops, a joint effort in case peacekeeping becomes necessary in Ukraine. And this tier would also allow EU-wide proposals, like sanctions against Russia, to be brought into the conversation, giving other countries the option to align or opt in, even if they're not part of the EU. The EU Commission could even take on a coordinating role to help streamline efforts across member states and the rest of Europe. So, we now have 3 clear tiers, ranging from Tier 1, the lowest level of integration, to Tier 3, the deepest level of integration. But how would a country actually move up through these levels? To join the European Community, that's Tier 1, there will be 2 basic requirements. The country needs to be a member of the Council of Europe and the European Convention of Human Rights. Yes, we know these are not EU institutions, but they form the democratic foundation of the European order. In short, if a country respects basic human rights and democratic norms, it should be eligible to join the community. So which countries will be part of Tier 1? In my opinion, it should include most of Europe, even countries that have left the EU, like the United Kingdom. And we also believe Turkey belongs in this category. Yes, it's sliding toward authoritarianism, but as long as Turkey remains part of the Council of Europe and the ECHR, it has the right to be included. This level of membership isn't about perfection. It's about geopolitical cooperation, and Turkey is too important to ignore. Plus, we think it's important to give the Turkish a European perspective before they align with Russia or China. And this community shouldn't be limited to just geographic Europe either. There's real value in involving countries like Canada or parts of Northern Africa, especially when it comes to shared strategic challenges. So maybe we shouldn't even call it the European Community, but rather something like the European Community plus friends. Yes, if you have a better name, please do let us know in the comments. This brings us to Tier 2, where things start to get more serious. To enter Tier 2, a strict democracy threshold must be enforced. Candidate countries must demonstrate clear alignment with EU core values, including an independent judiciary, fundamental rights, and a strong commitment to the rule of law. For EU nerds among you, this would mean closing Chapter 23 and 24 out of the 35 required chapters for full EU accession. Without meeting these standards and closing these chapters, a country cannot progress from Tier 1 to Tier 2. But if those values are upheld, the country can become an associate member. And in this status, it can choose to join the single market, the Schengen area, and/or the customs union. Joining the single market, for example, will require gradual legal alignment. But unlike the current model, a country wouldn't need to close all 35 chapters before entering the single market, just the relevant ones. In other words, associate members could opt into frameworks step by step at their own pace. Now, of course, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein would become associate members straight away. They're already deeply integrated into key EU frameworks. But other countries may also be ready to join them. The Western Balkans, Ukraine, and Moldova are all strong candidates to reach associate member status in the near future, potentially gaining access to the single market, or parts of it, within the next few years. I would also love to see the UK here, but that will probably take a bit more time. And I also think that associate membership shouldn't be limited to traditional EU hopefuls. Take Canada, for example. As the United States moves towards tariffs, Europe should go in the opposite direction. Open up, not close down. And then there's Tier 3, the European Union. This is full membership, the real deal, joining the club with voting rights, institutional representation, and access to all EU structures. The process of moving from associate member to full EU member would be similar to today. A country would need to close all 35 chapters of EU law, showing it's fully prepared to take on the responsibility of membership and to be fully integrated into EU institutions. Now, at the moment, there are 27 countries in this tier, but let's be honest, there probably should only be 26. Hungary's democratic backsliding, erosion of judicial independence, and disregard for core EU values means it no longer meets the basic standards of a functioning democracy. That's why EU members should have the power to demote a country to Tier 2, temporarily removing voting rights while allowing time to course correct. And if things continue to worsen, then down to Tier 1. On the flip side, countries like Montenegro and Iceland seem most ready to move up from associate member status to full EU membership. Also, bear in mind that all countries in associate membership and European Union membership are of course also part of the European Community. I just ran out of space for more flags. So there you have it, the 3 tiers of European integration. So is that it? Nope, not even close. Because the current European Union, as integrated as it is, still faces 3 existential problems. The lack of EU power over foreign policy and defense, the way voting works in the Council of the EU, and the unnecessary overregulation. Right now we have 27 national leaders flying around the world, each pushing their own agenda, and that makes Europe feel small and fragmented. We're not taken seriously, not by China, not by the US, and often not even by our own citizens. The same goes for defense and security. We have 27 separate armies that struggle to work together, thanks to different equipment, doctrines, and priorities. And let's be honest, with the size of our economy, we should have been able to push back against Russian aggression far more effectively. We need a unified foreign policy and a shared defense strategy so that Europe can finally hold its own. As for voting today, in the Council of the EU, a key institution that must approve all EU laws, each country gets a vote. For most areas of legislation, like the single market, climate policy, and many others, decisions are made using qualified majority voting. In short, QMV. That means 55% of countries representing at least 65% of the EU population, must vote in favor for a law to pass. But in critical areas like fiscal policy, foreign affairs, and defense, the EU still relies on unanimity. All 27 countries have to agree, every single time. And frankly, that simply doesn't work. It means one country can block the entire union from acting, sometimes just to gain leverage in an unrelated area. It's not democratic that a country like Hungary, with 9.5 million people, can hold back the will of the other 435 million Europeans. We need a European Union that uses qualified majority voting across the board. And finally, there's overregulation. The EU meddles in too many areas, creating rules that stifle innovation and competition. We should be focusing on where the EU adds value and giving some powers back to member states. Social policy, agriculture, those could be national matters once again. So those are our 4 measures to address these challenges. Now let's revisit our tiered model of the European Union to see where each of these would fit. In the very best case scenario, the EU would adopt a unified foreign policy, establish a common defense structure, and implement qualified majority voting across all legislation. At the same time, certain powers could be returned to member states to strike a better balance. But let's be honest, full agreement from all 27 member states is very unlikely, especially when it comes to deeper integration. So just like what happened with the Eurozone, we believe it's time for a coalition of the willing to move forward. And that brings us to Tier 4, the most ambitious level of integration yet. We'll call it the Inner Union. This will be a core group of countries that align their foreign policy, share a common defense strategy, and pay more into the budget, working hand in hand with the Inner Union and the wider European Union, but going further and faster. And of course, all major decisions here will be made by qualified majority voting. Existing institutions can be used to manage foreign policy, primarily the European Council, alongside the European External Action Service. And if you would like a deep dive into how this would work in practice, let us know in the comments. Tier 4 could begin with just a handful of countries. Maybe the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, France, Italy, Poland, Estonia, and Romania. Then over time, the goal would be for all EU members to eventually make their way into Tier 4. After all, as the Lisbon Treaty, signed by all 27 countries, puts it, this treaty marks a new stage in the process of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. So, this is the multi-tier EU we could envision for the European Union and beyond. Quite a bit different to the model we have today. It is simply more flexible, where countries can move up or down the tiers as they see fit, as long as they meet the requirements. In addition, this model gives candidate countries a real perspective, a way to get closer to the EU step by step, rather than drifting towards our geopolitical adversaries. And this way, we can also become a global player, especially in Tier 4. And that's the challenge for the EU. While other global powers are actively shaping the world stage, the EU remains a bystander, watching as major events unfold, but struggling to act with a unified foreign policy. And the world isn't slowing down. Every month, one of my favorite creators, Real Life Lore, delivers in-depth breakdowns of global events, and it's so refreshing to see this kind of analysis without YouTube restrictions. For example, a deep dive into the collapse of the Assad regime in December, what led to it, and what this power shift could mean for the region. A breakdown of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal in January, what brought both sides to the table, and whether this agreement has a real chance of lasting. And in February, how Trump's foreign policy took a complete 180 on Ukraine, why the sudden shift, and what it means for the future of Europe. But what makes War Room even better is its coverage of unreported stories, like the ongoing war in Sudan and its implications. Honestly, before watching the January recap, I had no idea about this conflict, or, for that matter, the South Korean president imposing martial law. This kind of content is exclusively available on Nebula, our video sponsor. Nebula is a creator-owned streaming platform built for people who want high-quality content without ads or algorithm-driven recommendations. It's where top creators go to make their best and most thoughtful work. Deep dives, original series, and extended versions of their YouTube content. like War Room or TLDR's WTF America, also called What to Follow USA, and much, much more. With my link, you can get 40% off Nebula. It's just $36 per year or $3 per month at go.nebula.tv/EU Made Simple. So go and watch War Room and my videos ad-free now. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and see you in the next video.